Tonight, I had every intention of coming home and making a video about planting onions. But when I drove in the driveway after work, it was raining and the wind was blowing. And if I lived in a more humid climate or maybe a more hospitable environment, I probably would be out there planting right now. But I don't. I live in Utah where when it rains, it really rains. And when the wind blows at my house, it really blows. And I'm not going to go out there and plant anything tonight. So I thought maybe we would just talk about fertilizer. So if you go to a nursery and you buy a bag of fertilizer, whether it's synthetic or organic, it's going to have three numbers on it. And those three numbers stand for the ratio of the three basic macronutrients that are in that fertilizer that every plant needs to survive and to thrive. And those three nutrients are nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. And I'm sure you're wondering, how am I going to remember that? Because I have a hard time remembering that. But I remember up, down, and all around. So the up nutrient is nitrogen, and that means everything up above ground level. And every plant needs that for good leaf growth and for strong stem growth. But vegetables that are above the ground, like spinach, lettuce, Swiss chard, anything like that, needs to have a higher percentage of nitrogen. And the second one, or the down nutrient, is phosphorus. And that is anything below ground level. And every plant needs that for good, strong root growth, but especially root vegetables like potatoes, onions, carrots, beets, turnips, all the good stuff need to have a good amount of phosphorus to thrive. And the last one, or the all-around nutrient, is potassium. And every plant needs that, especially for leaf growth. I had to turn the light on because it all of a sudden got really dark outside, so I guess it's raining even harder. Plants also need three micronutrients so that they can thrive, and that is magnesium, calcium, and iron. But how do you tell what your soil needs before you ever plant in it? And so in the state of Utah, you can take a soil sample to the Utah State Extension agent in each county, and they can run a soil test for you and tell you what nutrients you need and whether your soil is acidic or whether it's alkaline. Outside the state of Utah, you'll just have to Google it to find out where to have that done. I've never had a soil test taken on any of the soil that I've gardened in. So I guess this is kind of like a do as I say, not as I do. When I first started gardening, I didn't even know you could have a soil test done. And the longer I garden, the more I figure that if I can tell what a plant is doing, then I know what it needs. And so now we're going to talk a little bit about what those are. So how do I know that my plant needs nitrogen? Well, we know that nitrogen is used for the stems and the leaves on a plant. So if your stem is kind of spindly and it falls over without much effort, it needs nitrogen. If the new growth on your plant is just a pale green color instead of that rich, good, dark, healthy plant green, it needs nitrogen. If the older leaves on your plant are yellow, it needs nitrogen. But what about phosphorus? How do I tell if it needs phosphorus? Well, we know that phosphorus is for good root development. So let's talk about transplants first of all. If your plant is tall enough to be transplanted either into peat pots or directly into the garden, then when you pop them out of those 6-packs, if their root system is not well developed, you probably need phosphorus. If once your plant is in the ground, if the flowers of it seem to fall off before they're pollinated, it probably needs phosphorus. And if it doesn't seem to be setting the fruit as fast as you think it should, it probably needs phosphorus. And also, if you look at the underneath side of the plant, of the leaves, and they're kind of a purplish hue, it probably needs phosphorus. But what about potassium? Since it's the everything kind of plant thing, symptoms of a lack of potassium, when the older leaves look wilted or they cup downward, so you see the top of them and they kind of wilt, but they wilt from the top down, that is a sign it needs potassium. But what about those other micronutrients? Do they have signs and symptoms if they need them? And these I had to do a little bit of studying on, because I usually just put magnesium, calcium, and iron in all my plants when I transplant them into the garden. So if your plant is low in magnesium, then the symptoms will be yellowing of the leaf, but of the leaf tissue, but the veins will still be green. Or the leaves might be brittle and they cup upward instead of downward, like they do with potassium. So if they cup upward, then you need magnesium. Calcium is needed for leaves and roots and fruit. And the symptoms include new growth being deformed, and the roots might die off so that your plant dies. And if they do have roots left, they'll have like a bulb looking appearance to them. And the one thing that calcium or a lack of calcium will cause really rapidly is blossom end rot. And that doesn't matter whether it's on tomatoes or whether it's on squash. I know you've seen that where the tomato plant has a black spot on the very bottom of it. Now that can be caused by calcium deficiency and also by when you water haphazardly, you don't have consistent watering. That will cause blossom end rot as well. And the last one is iron, and iron's primarily for the leaves. So if your new leaves are yellow between the veins and the older leaves are completely yellow, that means that you need more iron in your system. So those are just some of the nutrients that you need to have a successful garden, and how you can tell whether you need them when you put a fertilizer on. Now, if you fertilize completely organically, so like putting compost, additional top dressing with compost, or giving it a compost drink, or I don't know what some of the other ways of doing completely organic gardening are, then good for you. You are going to have a lot of work into that garden by the time it's successful. I don't have a long enough growing season, and I don't have enough patience to just do organic fertilizing. So I do use a synthetic fertilizer. Do it like that or don't do it like that. That's all up to you. It's just a choice that I've made. So maybe, I was going to say tomorrow, maybe I can do that onion video. But tomorrow I'm going to go watch some rodeo riders and some dancers. So I'll talk to you later in the weekend. Bye.